Thank you for joining me. My name is Gray. I'm going through the book of Psalms. Today we're looking at chapter 62, psalm written by David. And now, if you've been following me through the past so many 61 chapters, you'll notice that there is a pattern in terms of most of the psalms that are written by David. He starts crying out to God or calling God and asking him to save him or asking why he's been rejected. This is different. One of the few that are different. He comes out praising God and calling on God and stating who God is to him. So let's jump in and see what's David saying and see what we can learn from it. Verse 1 says, "Truly my soul silently waits for God, for him comes my salvation." That's David stating out what his belief is. And he's saying that my soul, above everything else, will wait for God, because from what I know, my salvation will come from God and God alone. And he emphasizes this in verse 2. He says, He only is my rock and my salvation. So he only means that there is nothing else in this world that he would consider above God, and that if God isn't there, then there is no help. But if you bring everything else, it will only be God for him. He only is my rock and my salvation. And he says, He is my defense. So not only God defends him, but for him, when he's in trouble, the defense that he brings is God. And I love that. It's like you've got a sword and people are coming to get you and you pull out your sword, but David pull out God. And I want to ask you there, who's your defense? Do you have a plan B in life when things start to go wrong? You call to God and then you call to your friends or something else. David says he doesn't have any of that. He only is my rock and my salvation. He comes on and says, I shall not be greatly moved. And from verse 3, he starts talking about the people that are attacking him. So he turns around to say statements of fact that this is who God is to me. He's my salvation. He only is my defense, is my rock and my salvation. And then he talks about the people who attack him. He says, what is wrong with you? How long will you attack me? He's more or less like laughing at them. And says, you all will be slain because of who my defense is. And then from verse 4 it talks about the state of the mind of the people who attack him. It says they only think about bringing people down, and we know people like that, where they only get excited if they're able to bring someone down, or you're talking about bringing someone down. And David is saying that you got to realize that if you're coming against me, you're coming against God, and there's only one way down, and that you will be slain. More or less reiterating what he said in verse 2, He is my defense. And then from verse 5, again, he says more or less like saying the same thing that he said in verse 1 and 2. But this one he says is slightly different. This way he says, my soul wait silently for God alone. For my expectation is from him. Now it sounds like he's talking to his soul. And we've seen this in so many times where David starts talking to himself. He says, telling his soul, you know what we're going to do? We're going to wait on God, because that's where our salvation is. And he says the same thing. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be moved. Now that's something that's slightly different here. In verse 2, when he talked about he only is my rock and my salvation, he's my defense, he said, I shall not be greatly moved. So he will be moved, but not a lot. In verse 6, he's made up his mind. I shall not be moved at all. I don't know about you, but how do you feel when you come out of prayer? Do you feel worse off? Do you still feel sad or still stressed when you pray? From what I've noticed when going through Psalms with David is he would start out crying, but always in the end he'll come out full of faith, renewed and strengthened. Because in his prayer, he's talking to God, but he's also reminding himself who God is in his life. And that's what we ought to do. So by the time that David finishes reminding himself who God is and what God has promised and what he will do, he's always encouraged. And we can see this. In verse 2, he says, I shall not be greatly moved. So you might be able to move me. But in verse 6, it says, no, I'm not going to be moved at all because God is my defense. So that's what we ought to do. When you're going into prayer in such a way that you're believing for the things that God, you're asking God or you're bringing before God. By the time that you're finishing, you're coming out renewed and strengthened and full of faith. So verse 7 is going on. David goes on again, reiterating that only like that the only thing that will be able to save him is God. It says, in God is my salvation and my glory, the rock of my strength. Verse 8 turns around to the people around him and says, guys, you got to trust in God at all times. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. And verse 9 feels like he's comparing what he said in verse 8 earlier on, up telling people that you got to trust in God rather than trust in men, which is what his verse 9 says, because he talks about surely men of low degree are a vapor. So people that are lowly and poor, it says they are a vapor, they just disappear just like that. It says, but those that are high degree, so those that think themselves highly, those are a lie. Because when you take them and you put them on a scale, you'll find them that even lower or lighter than vapor. So they all disappear even quicker. So do not trust in oppression or vain hope in robbery. If riches increase, do not set your heart on them. David is just reminding us that we should not focus or trust in earthly things, emphasizing being that God should be our only place where we ought to trust and look to. And verse 11 and 12 I just love. I don't even need to explain. He says, God has spoken once, twice I have heard this. So basically just emphasize what he's going to say, that power belongs to God. No man has power over God. So power belongs to God. Here's another one. Also, to you, O Lord, belongs mercy. Inasmuch as God has power, he is also very merciful. For you render to each one according to his work. I pray that you will learn to wait on God as David did, so that in due time he will come and you see him as your salvation. God bless you.